What's going on, you guys? Bring your friends here. Since a lot of you guys have been asking about a build tutorial or video, I figured I'd just finally update it. So, what I'm running now, at least in this season, I'm running Dueling Inspiration Mirage. With Dueling, it's Duelist Discipline, Blind Anticipation, and Aptitude. With Inspiration, it's Sympathetic Visage, Restorative Illusions, Blurred Inscriptions. Mirage, it's Riddle of Sand, Desert Distortion, Loose of Mind. With Sword Text Pistol, double energy, that's pretty much always going to be a standard now since we only have one dodge. Smoldering and Stagnation with Adventure Runes and Wizard Amulet. So, in terms of variation of this build, you could possibly change up Wizard for Sages. You could change Smoldering for something else. I would technically keep Stagnation, and the reason being is because even though you technically have lingering thoughts on your axe, or not the cripple I'm speaking of, because with Sigil of Stagnation you cripple. I'm sure to some it seems kind of redundant when you already have it on your axe, but basically it's just about how fast you can actually get the cripple off. So like for example, if I just do just some random combo on this guy, it's just automatically, like you don't have to. The whole point of having the cripple on weapon swap for me is that you don't have to wait on you to actually get the Axe 2 off for the cripple to already be on the person. It's just weapon swap, you're already on top of him, and he's crippled. So it's a lot easier to land all of your axe and pistol abilities when you don't even have to land any of your abilities first. He's just already slowed down by cripple. So that's essentially the whole point of Stagnation on axe pistol. I wouldn't change the rune set. Like, Mesmer's more starved than ever when it comes to endurance, so I would definitely keep Rune of Adventure. As I said, Wizard or Sages, I would keep this exact weapon set. I would not change Axe for Scepter, as Scepter has just been like nerfed into oblivion. So, yeah. And then going into this, one of the two most important traits that make the build work are Blurred Inscriptions, Desert Distortion. Desert Distortion gives you a free ambush whenever you use Distortion, and Blurred Inscriptions gives you Distortion on Signet use. So meaning, like, if I were to heal myself, I would get an ambush for free on top of a second of Distortion. Now, you don't have to use the ambush every time you get Distortion. That's the beauty of it. You can essentially use it for whatever you need to when the situation calls for it. So, say if I really need to get my heal off, like, let's say I had wasted all of my shatters and needed to heal myself, and I have a dodge available. Let's just pretend, since it's on a 30-second recharge, I would cast Signet of Illusions while covering with a dodge. So let's say this goes off, all of my shatters are reset, and I have a second of Distortion. Then I can now cast Signet of the Ether without getting interrupted, and still have a second of Distortion after the fact to use a free ambush on somebody. So it really depends on what you have going on. Or say if I'm not being pressured and I know I'm not gonna be able to, or gonna be, like, say, using my heal. Not gonna be using my heal for the next 30 seconds. Like, I'm not gonna be pressured. Just use it for mobility. So you can just use it for, you know, mobility purposes, like say to decap somebody, for example. So I mean, there's tons of ways you can use it. Duelist Discipline's pretty standard on this since you're using pistol. Sharper Images also gains a little bit of positive benefit since you're running Wizard Amulet with the crit. So you have a 28% base chance, and then with Master Fencer you essentially have, like, I believe, 48% chance when the opponent's under 75%, so that's always good. Blind Anticipation and Aptitude are essentially mandatory in this, just because Deceptive Evasion doesn't really make that much use anymore, on this build at least, because you're so dodge starved. So with this, at least you have two huge sources of burst. With Cry of Frustration, Signet of Illusions, you get another opportunity to do so again. Inspiration, you could technically change out Sympathetic Visage for Medic's Feedback if you wanted to run like a more support role, but it just really depends. Like, I hate telling people to recommend for Medic's Feedback because essentially you're saying that your team sucks and you have to invest points into essentially rezzing them all game. But that being said, sympathetic visage is not really that good of a trait, especially when you have elusive mind, but we'll get into that later. Restorative illusions, this one's pretty much a given because there's no other good choices in the master tier, because you're not using focus, so Warden's feedback is useless. Protected phantasms, have them spawning with Aegis is useless as well. And then obviously, as I said before, blurred inscription is mandatory. Going into Mirage, Riddle of Sand actually does a lot more damage than you think, just because it's your first ambush attack applies confusion. This ability refreshed when you use a shatter skill. This actually is a pretty good source of sustain, because one, you're using Signet of Illusions, so you have a shit ton of shatters, and you have a shit ton of ambushes because you're using blurred inscriptions. So every time you ambush, you shatter, Riddle of Sand procs again for you to just keep going and going and going. So even though it doesn't look like much on paper, the 2 confusion does do a decent amount of damage in a sustained fight over time. And then obviously Desert Distortion. Now, when you're playing like a bunch of burst classes, the weakness and all of the Mirage Mirror help out quite a bit, because obviously, say if you got 3, max clones, distortion, you get 3 mirrors, that's, over 12 seconds of weakness, 3 dodges, and a little bit of damage that nobody cares about. You're not really doing it for the damage, you're doing it for the dodges and the weakness, not to mention the free ambush, which, if you're in Sword, equates for mobility, daze, damage, and a clone. So, not to mention, like, Sword is probably one of the most important weapons out of this build, just because of the fact that since you're ambushing so much, you're getting quite a bit of clone generation simply from Sword. Like, it's crazy how important Sword ambush is to this build as well. I mean, you're getting daze, damage, mobility, combo finisher, sure. You could proc like Chaos Storm off of it, or Chaos Armor, I mean. But yeah, it's just insanely important. I would not recommend playing this build without Sword. And then last but not least, Elusive Mind. Now, when it comes to Infinite Horizon, I guess you still could technically run it if you're not running to a condition-heavy comp. But since Necros are very prevalent in the meta, I would recommend Elusive Mind over Infinite Horizon, simply for the fact that you can... being able to dodge out of a fear is just extremely important, because it's a lot more efficient to dodge out of a fear than it used to, like, say, use Restorative Illusions to simply shatter out of it. And that's just a huge waste of your damage. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend Elusive Mind for this. What else? I guess it's just the strengths and weaknesses of the build. The strengths of the build is it's very mobile, it's very fast, has a lot of survivability, decent damage in the mid-fight. Obviously, it's not as much damage if you were speccing into, say, dueling and, like, illusions, for example. That being said, this is, like, the perfect combination for a good source of damage and a good source of just being able to live. Like, I think my rank right now is, like, 30-something. Yeah, 37. I believe I am the only Mesmer right now that's in, like, the top 50 that actually plays primarily solo queue and has still been able to get to a respectable rating on one account. Like, obviously, dual accounts is another story for another time, but yeah, not too many people run Mesmer this season. Not many people think Mesmer is decently well, but, I would tend to disagree. The weaknesses of this build is it cannot hold nodes. Like, if you use this as a point holder, you're going to have a bad time, just because of the fact that you have so much distortion that it's just not worth doing at all. Like, you'd be better off backcapping and supporting the mid-fight than you would be holding a node. Even though you could technically do it, like, say if you were forced to hold home node with this build for whatever reason, I would just say aim for winning the fight rather than holding the node. Like, just forget the node, let them node it, and then just try and kill him and recap it. Because if you don't, if you just, this build is not meant to be played defensively. Like, you will die if you try and like sustain somebody over a long period of time. You have to play offensively with this build, or else you're just going to get fucking steamrolled. But that being said, it's good for mobility, good for decaps, good for decent damage in mid fights, but it is not meant for holding a node in any way, shape, or form, just because, not for the fact that you can't live, just for the fact that you have so much distortion that whether you like it or not, the point's going to be neuted. So, yeah. And what else? I'm trying to think. I wouldn't recommend really changing any of these traits. When it comes to Signet of Midnight, it's a huge, huge deal. Blindness, Stealth, Distortion, 2 stacks of Confusion, just because of Ineptitude. Signet of Illusions I would also highly recommend as well, just because it's a complete Shatter Risk set. Not to mention you also get another Distortion, which is another free ambush. And yeah, just hugely favored with this build in my opinion. I would not recommend it. I mean, the only one that you could technically get away with would be Blink to put in something else, but I wouldn't really know what to put in here. I mean, I guess, you know, if you wanted to variate, excuse me, if you wanted to variate, you could swap out Blink for something else, and maybe Jaunt. But Jaunt is insanely useful as well, especially when doing damage. In terms of the rotation, I usually always start in Sword Torch and then swap to Axe Pistol. So usually, I guess one of the just start in Prestige, Phantasmal Mage, Illusionary Leap into an ambush, and then Cry of Frustration. I wouldn't technically use Blurred Frenzy, just because I want to swap to Axe by the time the Immob is over to get the cripple, and then continue my damage. Blurred Frenzy, I just like kind of save it if I'm really being pressured, but I don't technically use it offensively with my type of rotation and burst. And then I would go into X, I'd go Lingering Thoughts, Jaunt on top of them, and then depending on the situation, you can just Duelist, Magic Bulletin, Erupt, so on and so forth. So here's just an idea. Yeah, it's a decent amount of damage. I'll do it one more time just to I'll heal myself too. But depending on what you're going up against, you could also start up with Distortion. That way you have 3 more dodges, and that's 3 more clones that you can get through Sword. But you have to be in Sword in order for you to get those clones. So that's one of the also main reasons I started in Sword, because you can play very defensively and have a good source of clone generation as well, on top of the 3 mirrors. And you're just in like relative safety while doing a ton of damage. So, alright, I'll start it again. So that's also a typical rotation from me. I mean, it does decent damage, but you really have to be aware of everything while you do it. Like I said, with the mirrors, you can just get it, ambush again, get another clone from it. So it's pretty crazy. Like, Desert Distortion actually gives me more clone generation than Deceptive Evasion with this patch, simply because of the mirrors themselves and Sword. Like, as I said, Sword is very important with this, simply because they provide a great source of clone generation without Deceptive Evasion. Like, that's the big part of this. I'll wait 12 more seconds, and then I'll do another rotation. And I'll start with Distortion instead. I mean, that was a little sloppy, but you essentially get the point. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I really wanted to cover without it being like a 10-minute video. So hopefully you guys get some type of idea how it's played or how to play the build. If you have any questions, please leave your comments down below and I'll try to get to it as fast as I can. And on that note, countless bring your friends, and I'll see you guys next time.